What's going on, folks? Welcome to Study Hall. If it's your first time here, my name is Philip Godfrey. If you're returning, welcome back, Bible Study family. And so, Study Hall is built off of the scriptures in Matthew 6:33, where the Bible tells us to seek ye first the kingdom of the Father and his righteousness, and all things shall be added unto you. So, we gather together here to see, seek, and serve the kingdom of the Father. And so we are continuing today a study series that we began at the beginning of the year entitled From Creation to Revelation, where the Father has tasked us this year with walking through the entirety of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, book by book and chapter by chapter. Today we will be beginning our study of the book of Ezekiel, all right? The book of Ezekiel. And so I'm going to go ahead and jump into the book of Ezekiel. And before I get started, I always try to give a little bit of background on the book, just so folks can kind of have a good foundation. And so the book of Ezekiel is written, is written, believed to have been written by Ezekiel. That's why it's the namesake. He's the namesake of the book. But Ezekiel is a priest and also a prophet, even though he didn't operate in the position as priest. He was from a lineage of priests, and he is a prophet. He's a contemporary to Jeremiah and also Daniel. And Ezekiel is prophesying during a time period where the Babylonians have just come and taken away in waves the Judeans into exile. And so Ezekiel is prophesying to those prophesying to those exiled Jews. He's also at times prophesying to the entire house of Israel and Judah, so the all 12 tribes of Israel. And so the time period is from essentially from around when Jehoiachin was taken captive in exile, and then from then on, he prophesied. Ezekiel will see he prophesies about the falling of Jerusalem, the city, and then once that actually happens and he's still around, he begins to prophesy more of a message of hope and more of a message of restoration from the Father for the future time periods. And so the book of Ezekiel is highly misunderstood. And so we're just gonna walk through the text. We're gonna look at what the text says, because I don't want you to believe me. I want you to believe the Bible. I want you to believe the scriptures. So I just want to make sure that I don't have anything other foundational information to share about Ezekiel. And yeah. For the most part, the book is also believed to be written in chronological order. And so you can kind of, that helps out some people as well as they are moving through the text. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. We're moving into chapters 1. We're looking at today from chapters 1 to chapter 11. So chapters 1 to chapter 11. On our next study, we'll be looking at chapters 12 through roughly chapters 21. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. Chapter 1, the book begins by setting the timeline for the period that Ezekiel is presenting to us, that the writer is presenting to us. And this is telling us that 5 years into the captivity of those who went captive during the reign of Jehoiachin, because not all of the nation of Judah went captive at the same time. There were waves essentially. So you had the first wave that went captive with Jehoiachin, and then Babylon set up the king, made Zedekiah the king, and then there was a wave that went captive with Zedekiah, became the king as well. And so Ezekiel, who is a priest, also, he's a part of this group of captives, and they are now dwelling by the river of Chebar in Babylon. And at this point, Ezekiel goes on to describe a vision that he has that is shown to him of the heavenlies. He has a vision of angels and the creatures of the heavens. And so when we begin to talk about, what angels look like and all these different types of things, Ezekiel gives us a very detailed picture of the creatures of the heavenlies and the creatures of the heavens, and how the levels, that there are cherubs above the wheels, and there was a wheels, and they had a wheel inside the wheel, and all those different things. So it's very interesting to study out there. I mean, even I've seen some AI generated video pictures, images of what that looks like, based on what Ezekiel said. But it's very interesting to think about. Anyway, Ezekiel goes on to describe the heavenlies. The vision that was given to him was of the heavenlies, and he says that above the firmament and above the heads of the creatures, he was shown a throne. And on that throne there was the appearance of a man who sat upon it, and the likeness of this his appearance was as the glory of the Father. And so when Ezekiel sees this, he falls upon his face in fear, awe, and reverence, because he's essentially just been shown the Father's throne in this vision, and he falls on his face and just worship and just fear and awe and reverence to what is going on. This brings us into chapter 2, where now we hear the voice of that man who's sitting on this throne. The voice of this likeness of a man is now speaking to Ezekiel, calling him in this chapter, I believe, into yes, into his position as prophet, and then giving him additional instructions. So the conversation that Ezekiel is having with the Father at this point is placing him into service as a prophet with his assignment to the children of Israel. Now, this was a very important year or important time period for Ezekiel, because like chapter 1 told us that this was 5 years into the captivity. Well, Ezekiel is believed to be roughly 25 when he goes into captivity. And now 5 years later, he would have been 30 years old when he's beginning this vision and then getting called and placed into service as a prophet. This would have also been the same time period, since he's from a lineage of priests and he's a priest from that heritage, that he would have been moving into the priestly duties as well. So it's a very big year for Ezekiel, essentially. But the Father is having this conversation with him and placing him into service as a prophet, with his assignment being to the children of Israel. All right, that, like I said, more specifically to the Jews, the exiled Jews, but he's also speaking at times to the entirety of a united Israel that will happen in the future, all 12 tribes coming back. And so the Father speaks of this nation that he's assigned to as a rebellious nation. He decrees to Ezekiel that these people have rebelled against him, but not only them, their fathers have done it as well. So he's showing Ezekiel a pattern that has occurred throughout the lineage of this nation that has brought them to this point in time. He then goes on to tell Ezekiel that Ezekiel's job is to speak the word of him, to speak the word of the Father. His job is not to make people believe him or even to focus on changing their mind. He says that whether they hear, this is how the Father puts it in the text, whether they hear or whether they forbear. So whether they hear or whether they ignore, they will know that a prophet has been among them. Ezekiel's job and prophet's job are to speak the words of the Father. They are not necessarily to make you believe what they say. They're not necessarily to force you onto any of these things. And I personally believe, as I was preparing this, that this is a posture that we should take more often. That when we receive assignments from the Father, our job isn't necessarily the outcomes and trying to manipulate and control the outcomes in other people's lives. Our job is to present the information, to operate in obedience, and let the Holy Spirit, let the Ruach HaKodesh, let the Father, let him do the work in the people's lives that is needed. It may not be the season for there to be outcomes in the way that we're expecting. And so this was very encouraging to me, and I want to encourage you with that as well. And so the Father goes on to tell Ezekiel that the people are not going to be pleased with him. They're not going to be happy with the assignment that he has, or the words that he's required to speak, or the signs and the things that he's required to do as signs against them. But he tells him to not be afraid. We see very similar language here to what we saw with Jeremiah. Again, Jeremiah and Ezekiel are contemporaries. They are prophesying during the same time period. The same thing for Daniel as well when we get over there next. And so the chapter ends here, chapter 2 ends with Ezekiel receiving a scroll, which is a book essentially, from the Father of Lamentations, or I think it's from a messenger of the Father, but with lamentations and mourning written in it. And as chapter 3 begins, we see that the Father is giving Ezekiel instructions to eat that scroll, to consume that scroll, to consume that book, and then now go speak the words that are in that book out over the people Israel. And then he goes on to give him a bit more information about the hard-hearted people that that are his people, his chosen people, Israel and Judah. We're not going to look at the specifics of that, but you can study it out there in chapter 3. The Father then specifically tells Ezekiel to go and to talk to the captives of Judah. All right. And in verse 12, the text tells us that the Spirit of the Father divinely took Ezekiel up and took him to the people in the city Tel Aviv. And so now Ezekiel is going back into Judah, and they are having he's having a conversation with the people at the leading of the father. And so the father here tells Ezekiel again of his responsibility. Tell the people the words that I say, and warn them. And if you do warn them, if you are obedient, then there is a chance that these people will not die in their iniquities. It doesn't mean that they won't, but there is a chance that they won't. And as the chapter ends, Ezekiel receives instructions to go into the plain so that the father can speak with him down in this specific place. And he is told that these people that he is sent to will bind him and try to tie him up. So he's basically saying, again, these people are going to persecute you. They're going to come after you for the instructions and the things that I have spoken unto you and has given you to speak unto them. But the father speaks to him, and he tells him that he will open his mouth. He will open Ezekiel's mouth so that Ezekiel can speak to them. And whoever hears, great. And whoever doesn't, that's fine as well. Which brings us into chapter 4, where now we have Ezekiel receiving, still in this vision, or his taking up, we have Ezekiel receiving instructions from the Father that ultimately become prophetic signs to the house of Israel about what is forthcoming, and to Jerusalem and Judah as well. And so the first sign that we see here is it begins with Ezekiel being told to take a tile, which would have been like a brick or a piece of stone, something similar to that, and to draw the city of Jerusalem on it. He then tells Ezekiel to lay siege on that city throughout the drawing that he's doing, and set battering rams against it, and that this is going to be a sign of what will happen to the actual city of Jerusalem. And we know that this hasn't happened yet because we know that this ultimately does happen because we see we remember at the end of the book of Jeremiah, that Jeremiah saw, or that they saw the fall of Jerusalem, and the prophecy that Jeremiah had been giving them for 5 kings fulfilled. And the same thing is occurring here. The father goes on to give Ezekiel another prophetic instruction, which becomes a prophetic timeline, and he tells him to lay on his left side for 390 days, which would signify 390 years that Israel will deal with the iniquity of their decisions. He also tells him after this to lay on his right side for 40 days, which will signify 40 years that they will deal with the iniquity of Judah's decision, that Judah will deal with the iniquity of their decisions. And so now we have 2 separate prophetic timelines, 390 days, 390 years and also 40 years, where the people of Israel and the people of Judah will be dealing with their transgressions and dealing with the punishment being levied on them from the Father for the decisions that they have made. All right. And you should study out the 390 days and the 40 days. There's not a lot of consensus there about what that means, but it is interesting to kind of study out and see what the different sides of people's thought process are there. And so as chapter 4 ends, we see Ezekiel now receiving new instructions that are doubling down on this 390-day time period. He's receiving instructions from the Father to make bread, and then that bread shall be eaten for 390 days as a sign, but it shall be baked. The Father tells him to bake the bread with the excrement from men, so people's feces, which the father eventually changes to cow dung at Ezekiel's protest. So Ezekiel protests to the initial instructions, and the father is like, well, you can cook the bread with cow feces, which ultimately we know through just our studies here, we know that will bring defilement to the bread and also to the person that consumed that bread. And so this defilement of the bread was a sign of how the children of Israel would eat in the future defiled bread among the Gentiles once the Father drove them out of their city for their iniquities, all right, and out of their land for their iniquities. This brings us into chapter 5, where now Ezekiel is receiving even more divine instructions that become signs against the city of Jerusalem. Here, the Father is instructing him to cut off all of his hair and his beard. And he tells him to take that hair and weigh it, and then divide it into 3 parts. And one of the parts he's to burn in the midst of the city. Another part he's to cut it with a knife. And then the third part he's to scatter in the wind. And then he says, take a few of those that are left out of these 3 parts and bind them to himself, like tie them on his clothes or something like that, or a belt loop or something like that, and then throw them into the fire as well. Ultimately, what the Father is decreeing here through this prophetic action or these instructions is that this is what will happen to Jerusalem and to the people and the house of Israel, and the people of Judah as well, and the people of Jerusalem, because as verse 6 puts it, she have changed his judgments into wickedness more than the other nations. So this is the Father's positioning on what was going on. The people of Israel, the house of Israel, the people of Judah, the 10 tribes and the 2 tribes, all 12 tribes, they had become a place of wickedness. They had changed all of the Father's judgments and his precepts and his commands into wickedness more than all the other nations. And they themselves have refused him. And that is why there is a judgment that is being levied on them, because it is the requirement for the sins and the transgressions that they engaged in. And we already looked at that, how the Father's will wasn't to do any of these things because his nature is righteousness. We looked at that with our Lamentation study. But this is, he had to do these things because of it's the consequences that they carried, you know. And so as we move down to verse 12, we get more clarity regarding the prophetic instructions to Ezekiel. And the Father here says that 1/3 of the people are going to die to pestilence and famine. So that signifies like the 1/3 of Ezekiel's hair that he did the things with. 1/3 are going to fall by the sword, and then 1/3 will be scattered into all the winds and judged in those places that they are scattered. And ultimately, this will be accomplishing the Father's anger. So this is satisfying his anger that he desires to have amongst the people. Which brings us into chapter 6, where now we have Ezekiel prophesying to the mountains of Israel the words of the Father against their idolatry. Ultimately, the Father is I don't want to say most upset, but all of this really goes back to disobedience, which is idolatry in and of itself. The scriptures tell us that rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. And so idolatry is a big deal. And so he tells them that the Father will bring a sword upon them, will bring a sword upon these mountains and destroy all of the high places that his people have worshipped at in these places, and that he will completely abolish the works of those people and those idols during that same time period. And we see here that what is this showing us? That the Father takes a very serious stance against idolatry. And I personally believe that his heart has not changed towards idolatry. And we need to make sure that we are purging ourselves and our lives and covering our lives under the blood and repentance and everything, the blood of the Messiah, because idolatry is not pleasing in any way to the Father, and we should be ridding our lives of idolatry as often and as much as we can. As we move down into verses 8 through 10 of chapter 6, we see that even in all of this, even in everything that's going on, that the Father will save unto himself a remnant of people who will remember him in the places that they have been scattered, and will be sad for all of the evils that they have committed against him with their abominations. So there will be a remnant of people that are burdened by what was going on. They're going to be a group, or they're going to be a whole lot of folks that don't care, that are engaging in everything, that are going with culture or whatnot. But there will be a remnant of people who are saddened and pushing back against those things. And he says that they will know for sure that he is Yahuwah, and what he has said has not been in vain. So when these things happen, they will know that he is who he said he is, and his words do not fall to the ground. And we can believe that and stand on that too. And so the land ultimately will become desolate because of all these things and the abominations, which brings us into chapter 7, where now Ezekiel is receiving a prophetic word from the Father. And here the Father is decreeing that an end to the land of Israel has come as recompense for all of the abominations that have taken place, and that the Father will not have pity on them. So we see the continuation of the prophesying against what is going on with the nations, up in what's going on up in the mountains. Now the Father is decreeing that the land of Judah and the land of Israel are going to become desolations as well. And as the chapter ends here in chapter 7, we see the Father is speaking about how the people's silver and gold will be removed from them, and it will not be able to deliver them in the day of the wrath of the Father, because they had taken that silver and that gold, the things that he had blessed them with, the material possessions that he had given them, that he had poured on them, and they had taken that silver, that gold, and all the jewelry and everything, and they used it to create the images and idols of the abominations. They used the thing that he had blessed them with to worship someone else, to worship another deity, and to operate in rebellion and disobedience to his judgments and commands. And so the Father is going to give those things, all the silver and the gold and all those things, into the hands of strangers. But not only that, the Father's also going to give these strangers, he's going to allow them to possess their houses, the houses of the Israelites and the Jews. I'm using that term of all the 12 tribes. And he's going to allow those strangers to defile the holy places that they once worshiped at as well. All right, everybody still with me? Okay. So as we move into chapter 8, we see Ezekiel having a prophetic vision from the Father about the idolatry and abominations that were taking place specifically here in the city of Jerusalem. Well, so we've seen him speaking against the abominations in the mountains. Now we saw previously in chapter 7 him speaking against the abomination, or telling them that the city is going to become desolate because of these abominations. And now we have Ezekiel and the Father revealing to him the abominations and the idolatry that are actually taking place inside the city of Jerusalem, inside the territory of the land of Judah, and inside the Father's house itself, the place of worship, the place where he had dwelled, he had chosen for his presence to dwell. That he's showing him the idolatry that's going on in that place. And I personally believe that this is a picture and a depiction of what we see going on these days. Well, let's not get down into that rabbit hole. All right. And so the first vision that he sees, the Father first shows him an image of jealousy, which is like a statue or an idol. Okay. Next, he goes into like a wall, a hole in the wall, and he sees the images of creeping things, abominable beasts, and all the idols of the house of Israel. They were inside a wall of the temple. And then he sees how some of the elders of the nations, they are offering strange incense before the Father. Um, then it goes on to say that they did these things. These elders, they were saying that they did these things in the dark, and as they did them, they were saying that the Father wouldn't see them, because he didn't care about what was going on the earth any longer. So they're doing these things in disobedience to the Father, and then believing that they would never get caught, that he would have no knowledge of it or no idea that was going on, of those things that was going on. And so he also sees in this chapter idolatry of a group of women weeping for Tammuz. Tammuz is like a deity or idol, but there's a group of women who are weeping for Tammuz. And this is where we get the season of Lent from, the weeping of Tammuz. You can study that out yourself. But they are crying in worship to this idol and to this deity. And the Father is considering all these things that he's showing Ezekiel abominations. So the weeping of for Tammuz is an abomination. Again, we're not going to go there. All right. And so the final vision that he sees as part of this chapter is that there are a group of men that are in the temple, and their backs are toward the temple, while they're actually in the court of the temple, but their backs are toward the temple, and they are worshiping the sun toward the east. And this one, and the sun worship is a whole nother situation, but this one is the text considered these men and what they were doing a greater abomination. So all of these things were abominations, and we see that how they were actually inside the temple worshiping something else in this vision is considered a greater abomination from the scriptures. And the chapter ends here. We're still in chapter 8. It ends here with the Father asking Ezekiel. He's shown him all these things. He's shown him all the idolatry of Jerusalem, and he asked Ezekiel, "Hey, is this a light thing that the house of Judah would do these things against me?" And he tells Ezekiel that this is why they are dealing. This is why he's dealing in fury towards them, and this is why he will have no pity on them. And so Ezekiel, the Father opens up and shows Ezekiel what's going on behind the scenes on all of these things. And I believe that the Father is doing that for us in this season as well, for those that have eyes to see. Let's keep going. As we move into chapter 9, Ezekiel is also having a vision here, and he's having a vision of a group of men, 6 men specifically. One man, the text tells us, is clothed in linen and has a marker, essentially. A marker. It doesn't say marker, but I'm just giving you a term that's easier, more relative to today. Has like a marker in his hand. And so the Father tells the man in linen to go throughout Jerusalem and put a mark on the foreheads of all the people of the city who were saddened by all the evil things that were taking place. So, all the abominations that we saw in chapter 8 and that were mentioned in chapter 7 and above, he's now telling them that, hey, all the people who were not participating in those things, who were saddened by, who were pushing back against those things, place a mark on their forehead. And the other 5 men who were in this group, the father tells them to go throughout the city and kill all the people. Young, old, men, women, doesn't matter. Kill all the people, but do not harm and do not put any harm against any of those people who have been given the mark. And then he tells them to begin the slaying at the father's sanctuary. So start the judgment and killing the people at the house of the father, at the temple. And when people say like judgment starts in the house of the father, well, we see it here. We see an example or a type and shadow of that going on here. And the father also instructs those men, the 5 men who were tasked with killing all the people. He instructs them to take the bodies of those people and to fill his house with those bodies to bring defilement upon that house. Just like they had defiled it in secret, now there was a defilement, public defilement that was going forth due to the things that they had done. And during this time, while all this is going on, Ezekiel is crying out to the Father and asking him, will he destroy all of Israel while he is levying judgment on Jerusalem? And the Father again responds. We saw why he showed him why he did it in chapter 8. But we see here that the Father responds again and says that he will not spare them, nor have pity on them for what they have done. But he's already shown Ezekiel that there will be a remnant. So not the entirety of Israel will not be completely removed, but there are consequences for the things that they have done, and the vast majority of them will feel the effects of the judgment and his fury. The vision continues in the chapter 10 with the man in linen being told to go up into the firmament. And so this goes back to chapter 1, I believe, where it's talking about the vision that he had with the man and the throne and the wheels and all the creatures of heaven, or some of the creatures of heaven. It tells the man in the linen to go up into the firmament between the wheels. So that means that there are levels to the wheels, between the wheels, but under the cherub, and fill his hands with coals of fire from between the cherubims. And then these coals that he takes from between the cherubims, he's to bring them and scatter them over the city of Jerusalem. Ultimately, what we see here is that the Father's glory is departing from his house in Jerusalem, that he had this place that he had once chosen to dwell, for his presence to dwell for his people. He is now, his presence is now departing. His glory is now departing from that place. And his glory is now gone up, according to the text, above the cherubims, and he dwelt over above them. Probably on the throne, but it doesn't say that. But he dwelt over and above them. Does that make sense? After this was going on. The vision continues. Ezekiel's vision continues into chapter 11. He's been in this vision for a long time. But Ezekiel's vision continues into chapter 11, where we see the Father is now levying judgment on the leaders of the land, on the leaders of Jerusalem and Judah. And he gives Ezekiel a word to speak unto them regarding how the Father knows the things that are on their mind, and nothing that they even think can escape him. Because those leaders had gotten to the point the way that they said, we're doing this and the Father doesn't know. And we've all been there before. Like, I'm doing this and he don't really know what's going on. No, he knows. And so he tells them through Ezekiel that, no, I know what's on your mind. I know the thoughts that you have, and I know that nothing that is going on up there is escaping me. He tells them, Ezekiel prophesies to them that they have filled the streets with their slain, and now a sword will come upon them, the leaders, and they will be delivered into the hands of strangers because of their rebellion, their disobedience, and how they have followed after the ways of the heathens around them. If you hear nothing else I said today, please hear this. Do not live your life in rebellion, in disobedience, nor in following the ways of the heathens around you. Live your life in alignment to the instructions of the Father and his kingdom. Chapter 11 goes on to have the Father speak to Ezekiel that even though the house of Israel, including Judah, has fallen and they've been scattered, that he will continue to even be among them as a little sanctuary in the countries where they are going. So his presence will still dwell with them, and at some point in the future, he would gather them from the people and bring them back and assemble them back into the land of Israel, and they will now be a nation again. And he will give these people a new heart and a spirit that they may walk in his statutes, keep his ordinances, and do them. But this is only for those, listen, the text tells us this. This is only for those that do that, that actually follow the instructions. For all those who continue to walk after detestable things and abominations, the text tells us that the Father will continue to recompense against them. And as chapter 11 ends, we see the vision ending and Ezekiel being returned back to Chaldea, to the land or to Babylon, and along with the other exiles that he was there with. All right. So that's Ezekiel study number 1. We got a few more of these. Hopefully, you guys tell me what stands out to you as you're reading through the text and whatnot. Please down in the comments. On our next study, like I said earlier, we'll be looking at chapters 12 through 21. So please go ahead and give those a read. I think that's all I got for us. But listen, I love you guys. But more importantly than that, the Father loves you. Let him love you. Start before you're ready and don't stop, guys. I'll see you next time.